Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, college football fans across the nation and around the world. This is Tim May with the Tim May Podcast. I'm trying to sound a little bit somber. How am I doing there, co-pilot Austin Ward?
That was a fitting tone for the way this show is going to go.
You know, even though I like to look at my podcast as being all about college football, not just Ohio State football, let's face it, most of the people listening to this podcast are very interested in Ohio State football, have a vested interest in many of them. And I want to come out to those folks and everybody who listened to me on the radio and TV and even maybe read a couple things I wrote this past week about the Ohio State-Michigan game, about the Ohio State running game being underrated going into this game and being a big difference is going to be a big difference in the Ohio State ability to stop the run going into this game, and that was going to show up to be a big difference. I want to admit right now I was wrong. And yeah, those letters, I got the block O in the middle, but those letters are in blue. And if you couldn't see that and you're listening on one of the many platforms that this podcast shows up on, I had WRONG spelled out in blue letters with the middle O being block O, which there wasn't a lot of block O going on. Austin, am I being too harsh as we jump into this podcast?
I wish I'd been prepared with some props as well. That was a good one. And fitting because I was also very wide of the mark, and I've been a popular target on the Michigan On 3 site over the last week or so. And there are a lot of people that follow us regularly at Lettermen Row who are also upset about the way that I have evaluated things this season. And hey, I'm not always going to be right, and I don't pretend to be. I still think if you put these teams on paper, you would always pick the one wearing scarlet and gray as the one you would want to bet on going into that game. But they didn't deliver, and that team that you wrote, the reason you used that shade of blue, they deserve to win on Saturday. There's no other way to say it. They played better in that game. They were more physical. They answered the toughness. I know the cliches that you want it more. Ohio State always wants to win the game. I wouldn't say that Michigan wanted it more. They just prepared and delivered when it arrived much better. And there's nothing you can do except, admit if you're wrong or tip your hat if you lose, whatever the situation is for the people covering it or the people that played in it. And it's going to be really painful for them. And it's going to start that process now immediately for Ohio State to figure out how to fix it.
And by the way, to help put this game in perspective too, the aftermath and then what's coming forward, I've got a couple of former Ohio State Buckeyes who've been on this podcast before, including one last week, Matt Wilhelm, who also was wrong about what he saw coming, former linebacker, former national championship linebacker and NFL player, and then Marlon Kerner, who we talked after the Oregon game on what was wrong and what needed to be fixed defensively. It looked like Ohio State got some things fixed, especially in the run defense as the year went on. Boy, did it show up in a big way that, know that you can still get shoved out of the way and teams can score and can gain yards running the ball and score. And then I have Bill Bender just kind of set the sort of the national picture of what this loss does to Ohio State, what the win does for Michigan. He doesn't think it really changes a whole lot one way or the other, but I'll let him tell you in his own words. But Austin Ward, got to have you on, man, because number one, you're my co-pilot. When I lose it, you're there to fly the plane back in the proper way. And let me ask you this just right off the bat. Everybody knows what happened on Saturday. Ohio State got shoved out of the way by Michigan. That's the bottom line. The big changes come on this coaching staff, do you think? We'll get into it more at the end of this thing, but just give people a hint. Do you expect some major changes?
The level of changes, I wouldn't want to put a number on it as we sit here right now. I think that there are going to be significant alterations to the staff and the scheme, mostly on defense. I think the same will be true on the offensive line as well. That I have talked, and there's a lot of people who question Greg Dudrawa's recruiting ability, and my stance on that has always been that's fine. Once you get the raw material on campus, Greg Dudrawa is able to develop those guys NFL draft picks. But if the other part wasn't meeting what Ohio State wanted, and then you saw what happened to Ohio State's offensive line on Saturday, I think that changes the equation. He's also, relatively, beaten down physically. He had major back surgery to use that. That's another major situation. You may decide this may have been determined already for Greg Dudrawa that maybe he couldn't hold up physically. I don't know. I'm saying my expectation is that Greg Dudrawa will not return to Ohio State, and that he'll be looking for an offensive line coach. The amount of changes that may come defensively, I would expect a minimum of one, and that number could grow. And the tricky part of this, and Ryan Day went through that a year ago after the Alabama game, is okay, that one was even tougher. You're factoring in COVID and roster that was shorthanded and all this other stuff, but how much stock are you going to put in one game, which is the most important game, and they were embarrassed and came up short, and how much other progress did you see in the previous 10 games, and how much of it was real, how much of it wasn't? And so that decision didn't have to be made on Saturday night or Sunday or Monday, but I do think that it will be made in relatively short order because the whole calendar has changed, Tim, and you know that how difficult and different it's become with the early signing period, with a coaching carousel that is going absolutely crazy, with Lincoln Riley, tipping over another major domino on Sunday. And I don't think Ohio State can afford patience in this situation because they lost everything on Saturday, everything. And to get that fixed, they can't afford to drag their feet on it.
Okay, we'll come back and we'll hash some of that out, man, because that's really the most important thing that's going on right now in this, what you said, this crazy coaching carousel that's going on with all these other jobs that still haven't been filled, major college head coaching jobs. It's crazy what could happen in the next month, even to the Ohio State staff. We'll see if anything happens there. But I'm talking about of maybe somebody trying to poach as opposed to somebody being pushed out. But, we'll come back. First, let's get to my conversation with Matt Wilhelm. Like me, you wanted to step in there and, in essence say, boy, I got that wrong, but here's what happened. Here's what you should look for. Here's what went wrong on the field and how can things be changed. We'll get to that one, and then we'll move on to a conversation with Marlon Kerner, and then finally my conversation with Bill Bender before we get back to Austin Ward for an extended period, but he will be with me in those interims. Hey, it's been a long time since I had Matt Wilhelm on my podcast, almost a full week. Hey, Matt, welcome back to the 10 May podcast, my man.
It's good to be back, and under some unfortunate circumstances, but I think the one great thing about Buckeye Nation and the success that we've been able to enjoy, especially in the game and the rivalry, is, we can't shy away from, what it is. When it's good enough, we want to, proclaim how great we are. And when it's not quite good enough, we have to be honest with ourselves and have enjoyed, almost 20 years of great success. And so to, take an underhand jab and, to the mouth and be able to talk about it. So here we are.
Yeah. Okay. Let's get right down to it. Bottom line is, I said, and when you and I were talking last week, I thought the two underrated things about Ohio State was its ability to run the ball, which was being discounted going into this game, and its improved ability to stop the run. And boy, was I wrong. At least in this game, you and I, we talked about it. I even quoted you in my story last week about this being must-see TV, the Ohio State offense. The passing game was still sort of there, but let's just go back to my square one here. Yeah. What was just your impression as things went on of what was going wrong on both sides of the ball when it came to running and stopping the run for Ohio State, and just how I don't know if stunned was the right word, but how would you describe your emotion as you were watching it?
Sure. As a silver bullet linebacker, immense frustration, and in many different directions. I think the lack of physicality by our defensive front, the lack of execution by our defensive front. I think the lack of playmaking by our defensive front. And so that doesn't just, say anything about just the linebackers. I think also you look at the front four or five, however you want to look at it. It was if you go back again, only because I know it because I played in it and I understand the rivalry, you look at the linebackers and the defensive players, and the game is in many cases won or lost in the trenches.
Yeah. And
you look at, again, the tackles for losses and the sacks and the forced fumble, even going back to our game in 2002, Kenny Peterson's forced fumble, Will Smith with the fumble recovery, the number of times, again, not to pat myself on the back, that I was making plays on that side of the line.
Yeah.
And it goes with a firm understanding of what they're going to do. And in many cases being there to make that play before they can block you. So there's an anticipation, and that's kind of like the preparation that I talked about. Then there's just the physicality and the attitude. And I think when you talk about a silver bullet, that's a silver bullet flying through the air, ready to pierce something. And, going back to when I coach my son and to when I've learned this game, it's, do you want to be the hammer or the nail? And I think watching that football game, and again, I have not watched it again. And that's something that I, whether it be through YouTube or, some other type of access, I did not DVR it because I wasn't home. I want to watch it again, but watching it one time was enough. Mm-hmm. And to know that, 5 touchdowns to one player and their ability to run the football at will. And I think in a nutshell, it just wasn't good enough across the board. And I think there's a lot of things that need to get fixed, and we'll have some time to do that, not playing the Big Ten championship game and going to play in a January 1 bowl game. But I think for me, it's just frustrating as a fan, as a former player. But on the flip side, I'm not going to be the one that's just going to close the book on Ryan Day and these defensive coaches and these players. We were young on defense. And I think even ahead of the Michigan State game, with the Walker kid being in the Heisman, the Heisman race, my biggest concern was our ability to stop the run against Michigan State and our ability to stop the run against Michigan.
Yeah.
And we did it in one and not in the other. And then on the flip side, I think, and you and I talked about this ahead of, this game, was watching Michigan the few times that I did this season. Their fronts on both sides of the football are highly impressive. Yeah. And I think it's probably, regardless of how many 6-year seniors or how many freshmen they're playing, I don't really care. I think it's finally the first time in this rivalry since Jim Harbaugh's taken over that this team really epitomized what they thought they were going to get when they hired him 5 or 6 years ago, based on his track record at Stanford and what he did in the National Football League.
Yeah. I'll be, honest. I thought that kind of game, although it could keep you in games, that kind of game, being able to win the big games, was gone. You know what I mean? And just shows, man, there are some things that are tried and true in football, blocking and tackling,
Yep.
And that game, this past Ohio State Michigan game, was the epitome of what can go wrong when you get dominated in both of those areas. And
yes,
I think you're exactly right. Let me ask you this. So do you make any changes, Matt? If you're large and in charge, if you're Ryan Day looking at it, because, he's hearing the hue and cry from Ohio State fans as we speak, from former players, et cetera. When your safety, Bryson Shaw, who made one of the best plays, if not the best play on defense on Saturday, when he comes out and basically says it was embarrassing, the way Michigan was able to run the ball, especially in the second half when you thought the second wind was coming. And it has come so many times for Ohio State the last 7 or 8 years in the second half when it didn't come. But are there schematic changes you're going to make? Is there personnel or 2 changes you would make in the coaching staff? What sort of fixes, what got you beat in the most important game of your season?
Sure, absolutely. I think the one thing, my big takeaway, and it has a lot to do with, again, that game kind of came and went, and it didn't ruin my day. Are you frustrated? Sure. Do you send some text messages out to the right people, disgruntled text messages to kind of, walk through and talk through that game? Sure. But then I think I also then turn on, the Iron Bowl and turn on, Bama Auburn.
Yeah.
And the one thing that popped up in my head after watching that football game, and at the juncture I was watching, it was 10-6 Auburn, I think 10-6 or 10-3. And then they go to, 4 overtimes, with the new rules, they go deep into overtimes. And I had a little epiphany, and it was a lot to do going back again to the 2002 season that I played in, in that rivalry game, and the success that we had as a defensive front, not just a linebacking core. And I want to go back to the run stuffing, not playmaking inside defensive tackles.
Yeah.
And I think you look at, Hankins and Michael Bennett and some of these guys, they made plays, but they did their job first so that the backers can make all the plays.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing that I think when you watch Alabama, they have, defensive linemen get drafted in the top 75 picks every year, because they keep their backers, who also go in the first round almost every year, clean to make all those plays.
Yep.
And so I think, so it's not to single out any one player, or even the scheme. I think what we need to look at is, again, conceptually look at our scheme and go, how can we get, run stuffing active bodies in defensive tackles that can, that make plays when available, but they don't try to make plays every down, because there are defenses. Again, you look at Ray Lewis with the Baltimore Ravens, the Saragusa and those big linemen up front, their names because of how great Ray Lewis was making all the plays.
Yeah.
And then Ray Lewis talks in the media and you watch a broadcast and you look how clean he is. And then they showcase a defensive lineman having 650, 700 pounds leaning on him, holding on to both of them. So Ray scrapes to the clean hole to make the tackle for no gain. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's the Buckeye football, especially in the spread offense, because, you're going to get 4 and 5 wide. I thought what Michigan also did, just my football brain and the way I watched the game, did the football not follow the tight end most of the second half? So whether they motioned him from wide or in, or they motioned him across in like a U motion, it was kind of zone cutback. And our backers were just standing there, waiting to be team blocked up onto the second level. Yeah. And at no point were we able to just, use our hat and hands, blast a guy, pop off, make a tackle, even for 3 yards. I mean, it was 5 yards plus almost each and every time. And we know enough about football, and I'm sure all of your listeners, and viewers know well enough that, 2nd and 5, 2nd and 4 is an offense is on schedule, able to take shots down the field, able to do something exotic. And it basically, you have the defense eaten out of your hand, because you have to be ready for the full offensive playbook, as opposed to being in 2nd and 8, which is predominantly much more of a passing down. You can then bring in your, passing defense. You can call some type of coverage. You can bring a blitz, to get a sack. So you can put them in 3rd and 12 plus. So I know I'm kind of rambling, but I think more so than anything, it's we've always had those defensive ends that are able to get home. We talked even earlier in the season, we don't have those guys. Now, have those guys come into their own a little bit? Absolutely they have. Was it as good as we've always had it? Absolutely not. But I think more so than anything, and this is not an indictment against any one individual, but I think defensive tackles that occupy space and make the plays that need to be made, as opposed to defensive tackles that are actively trying to win and make plays. And then everybody else, there's a domino effect. Everybody else has got to read off that, as opposed to accounting for guys in their gap, doing their job, controlling the line of scrimmage, and allowing, playmaking safeties and linebackers to see a very clear picture to allow them to run and hit.
Yeah. As I've explained it, to try to put it in layman's terms, I thought Penn State, I thought Nebraska, and I thought Michigan did a great job of their defensive line blocking for their linebackers, for want of another term. Of in essence, and then also having an unfettered offensive lineman get into the face of Steel Chambers a lot in that game. What are you going to do when a 330-pound guy, when you've got to shed him before you can get to where you want to go? And really, that really was the heart of it all. Because that's how they were able to sustain drives, and then, like you said, set up things.
It was. And I think the one thing I always look at, Tim, and I think for the novice fan, is I always look at the box score after a game to kind of tell me, okay, I've watched it, I understand the outcome, and then I go look at, and the box score will tell you who played well and who didn't.
Yeah.
And the one thing that I look at when it comes to our backers specifically as a former linebacker is who made all the tackles on defense?
Yeah.
Will tell you a lot about a football game. And then also, how many of those are solo tackles or assisted tackles? So we might have a guy, any linebacker, and again, not just this game, but any game, 12 tackles, but 2 of them are solo and 10 assists.
Yeah.
Okay. So that tells me, okay, that might be the way that our defense wins. I just don't know this. I'm not in those meeting rooms, right? But I'm left to assume based on, my, football acumen to go, the guy ain't running around knowing where the football is ahead of, he's just doing a lot of reacting, and running to the football, which is great. A player that's got 12 plus tackles, that's a good game in many cases. But when I go back to, and I know the game has changed a lot, but you look at, the AJ Hawks, the Laurinaitis of the world, myself, the Katzenmoyers, it's like we were by far and away, 9 solos, 3 assists.
Yeah.
And it was our ability to identify what they were going to do, how they were going to attack us. We won our one-on-one battle and then got the guy with the ball to the ground behind it.
Yeah.
And I just didn't see a lot of that happening.
Well, I think Michigan had 8 or 9 tackles for loss, including, I think, 4 sacks. Ohio State had either 0 or 1 tackle for loss,
Right.
Yeah.
Where's the game being played? On which side of the line of scrimmage?
Especially when Michigan, is running the ball. And Matt, that is the essence of offensive football, is when you can line up and run the ball. The other team knows you're going to run the ball. They know pretty much where you're going. They did most of their damage between the tackles. And the other team knows you're running at them, and they can't stop you. That's why in that second half, you kept watching that game, waiting for an Ohio State player to make that, a few times it got the third down, to make that third down play. And in fact, it, in essence, didn't happen when they needed it. I mean, Michigan scored 4 touchdowns in the second half. I mean, that's
when you go down 2 scores, and you learn this by watching an NBA game. How does an NBA game within reach for a good team when they're down by 14 points?
Yeah,
that's 3 stops and 3 buckets, and it's a 6-point ball game. You know what I mean? That's the NBA.
Yes.
So when you watch football, and you're down 2 scores, 2 things got to happen. You're not all of a sudden just going to go stop what Michigan was doing. Okay. So you've got to strategically, and that's, the essence of coaching and being a play caller, is identifying those situations in a game where you're running out of time because you're not playing against the clock. You do have a high powered offense that, can score quickly, but it has not come very easy in this football game. So you have to go, what can I do to get them in an uncomfortable down and distance where it is now, the needle kind of tips after the way that the game's kind of gone into our favor. And that's a blitz. That's some type of trap coverage, that kind of confuses the quarterback. And maybe he forces the football into a tight window where the ball gets tipped, the ball gets popped up in the air. We've seen, our defenses for 25 years now make those plays, especially when they need them. And again, we're always left talking about it. When the defense doesn't make those plays, we're left talking about, situations like this where, the 10 times they've lost in the last 5 years, the defense just didn't make that one play or get that one stop. So I was just banking on the whole second half, sitting there with my son watching the game going, when are we going to get stopped? Or man, do we need a turnover? Because you turn the ball over, you go score. Then you actually put the pressure back on Michigan at home. Harbaugh, 0-5, lost 8 of the last 10 or 8 of whatever the dang record is. Then you put the pressure back on them to go execute as an offense again, because if we get one more stop, we've seen it all year long, how potent and high powered our offense is. I mean, I just felt in my gut, I had a little bit of a feeling, and I told you this.
Yeah.
I had a feeling that our day was coming. You know what I mean? And truthfully, I've sent a few texts out, and there's a little gift that all of us, you guys can repurpose if you want. It's a squirrel with its eyes closed and kind of picking up a nut. And I think in some cases that's what this is. It's a blind squirrel finding a nut, because this is not something that's going to happen each and every year. I think, that comment you mentioned, by the safety Shaw, I think the comments by Coach Day following the football game. I love the fact that he didn't say embarrassed, at least the coaching staff didn't. I feel awful. We feel like he let down himself, his, those seniors or those Buckeyes playing their last game, the fan base, the university, because, what Coach Tressel, going back to our, Wednesday or Tuesday, Wednesday, podcast is all about what Coach Tressel started.
Yeah.
So you get very comfortable beating Michigan every year, as much as we want them to be good. And at the end of the season, put up a fight, which helps project us forward when we take care of business. We just didn't do it. And I think it would have been an indictment against our program, again, to, eke out a Michigan victory and then go into the Final Four thinking that we're, it, and get lambasted by a Bama, or a Georgia or whoever is it, we might actually have played.
Yeah. Hey, last thing, I'll just get out of here.
Yes, sir.
I've always said the essence of defensive football anymore, even in the modern game, you got to have that A-gap stuffer, man. You got to have that A-gap dude who literally becomes the fulcrum of almost everything else you do. Alabama almost always has that guy. Georgia definitely has that guy this year. Ohio State had that guy last year, Tommy Togiai. Then in the most important game of the year, he was out with COVID against Alabama in the national championship game, which changed everything.
Sure.
Just changed so much of the dynamic. Ohio State did not develop or did not have that guy this year. It was just, and back to what we were talking about real quickly. Number one, you can talk about scheme, but number two, it does come down to personnel to a certain extent, right?
It does. And I think that's the essence of the perfect storm that we're trying to create is, and I think we've seen the evolution of scheme from the way that we started, some of the transitions that happened, with Coach Combs and Barnes, and then who we saw the most. I mean, the players that were starting for this football team playing 70% plus of the snaps weren't the guys that we saw play a lot in the last couple of weeks of the season. So a lot has happened. And I think the biggest onus on Coach Day, regardless of whether a change, in the staff happens, if at all, or if he's comfortable with the guys they have, it's really just, and it goes back to what I've said again, it's just, who are we? What's our identity? And then when you can peg that, you go recruit and or develop players that fit that identity. And you don't stray from it. It is who you are. It's not just, mid-season, we just hit the eject button and we're going to be something else. We're going to be blitz happy now, or we're going to be a run stopper, or we're going to play great coverage and play soft and survive the run. It can't happen that way. And that's, why you see teams sometimes, drop multiple games in a row because they don't know who they are. And so I think identifying that with the time that we do have, I think represent Buckeye Nation very well in the January 1st bowl game. Go out on an extremely high note and don't let what happened this past Saturday affect the next 60 days. And even furthermore, I think for the staff to not let it affect them when they go hit the road, to go find the players to fit that identity, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I think offensively, it's very clear who we are. Defensively, we can say who we want to be, but actually going out and do it is a different thing. And so it's conceptually from the coaches down to the players, to the potential high school players that are going to want to come and be a part of it. Having that, and everybody be lock and step to fit, again, find the square peg to fit in a square hole. Don't put the round peg just for now in the square hole and see if it kind of fits. Yeah. That's the way that what happened Saturday happens.
Matt Wilhelm, I told you I wouldn't keep you long. I appreciate you coming on again, man. You're a breath of fresh air, even though the air is cold. It's still a breath of fresh air, man. Thanks for joining the
squirrel found a nut. The blind squirrel found a nut.
I like that. That's like I've said so far on this podcast. Yeah, Michigan won this year. Now they're 3-17 against Ohio State since 2001. So. There's two ways.
What I'm really looking for. I'm really looking forward to the day, and we were damn close, and we'll get there in the next 10 years. Is evening up the rivalry. I believe now it's 50, 57, 58, 51-1, or 10 or something like that, right? Yeah. I don't care about the ties. It's winning and losing, right? So about 6 more victories, and Michigan will have nothing to say.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you heard it from Matt Wilhelm first. Matt, thanks for joining the Tim May podcast again, my man.
My pleasure, brother. Anytime. You know that.
Austin, one of the great things about Lettermen Row is we do try to get former players' inputs on things, because Lettermen Row, you and I didn't letter at Ohio State. Did you letter at Wyoming in some sport at all?
I don't think that we got letters at the branding iron to write about it. But, we definitely should have. It's journalism is a contact sport.
You know what? You know what's funny is I when I moved up here from Texas, I went to Ohio State for a few years, kind of like John Belushi, at Faber. But I got paid for being on the Lantern staff, and so I had an NIL going even then. It's funny, you could pay your editors and stuff on the paper, but you couldn't pay the football players. But I digress.
We really cashed in at the branding iron and the Lantern.
We sure did, man.
All I needed was a little bit of beer money. So, boy, you're so right. When a lot of those bars have been torn down on High Street now to make for a better High Street. I'm not sure it made for a better atmosphere on High Street, but I digress. Right. Let's go. Speaking of blast from the past, let's go back to my conversation I had with Marlon Kerner, who also kind of requested to be on because, he was the guy I had on after the Oregon game who's basically laid out some things he'd like to see changed. Didn't necessarily mean coaching staff, but some things needed to change in the Ohio State defense. He was very encouraged by what he saw in the next, 9 games. But then game 12 came on, game 10 after the Oregon game, but the 12th game of the season came along and wow, what do you say? So let's get to my conversation with Marlon Kerner, former Ohio State and NFL cornerback. And as promised, ladies and gentlemen, return visit by Marlon Kerner, former Ohio State cornerback, former NFL cornerback. Marlon, welcome back to the Tim May podcast, man, under, somber circumstances. You're even having to flip your profile a little bit, I guess, this week because you lost a few bets on the game. Am I correct on that?
Yes, you are correct. And
I'm lucky I found you, but go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you for having me back. I had a little bet with somebody that I'm really good friends with, and he actually worked for Michigan when Harbaugh got there. So we stayed in contact and we put a little friendly wager on the game. And it was more just a simple, hey, what do you want? Like, I think he lost most of the bets. So he went to our Christmas party. I brought him an Ohio State sweater. It was too hot. So I had to back up Ohio State tie. So he's there, full suit and everything, wearing the Buckeye tie, jacket open, had to show everyone. And everyone knows how much of a Michigan supporter he is. So we had a little friendly wager. All social media profiles get changed to the winning team's logo. And I was on the losing end. So everything, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, everything, every social media platform that I have and that I'm on now has Michigan football as the profile picture for the week. So come next Saturday, I can't wait to take all that stuff down. But, I told him, I said, hey, I'll keep my word, win or lose. And unfortunately, after nine wins in a row, we're on the losing end in this series.
Dude, you texted me in the middle of that game and, you and I have known each other for a long time, but we've got reacquainted here in the last couple of months. But what was just sticking out to you most of all as you watched Ohio State's defense in that game? I mean, we talk about the offense a little bit too, but what just jumped out at you? I think you and I kind of touched on a little bit before we started here, but was it hard to watch?
It was very hard to watch, right? I think the one thing that jumped off from the opening kick and the intensity and the passion that Michigan played with was not up to task. It was not equal on the Ohio State side. Like they were playing inspired. They played with more heart. They played with more intensity. They played with more passion. Like they really wanted to win that game.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes you kind of get lulled into this space of we're superior. We've always had the better athletes. And up until yesterday, that was always the case. When you looked at paper, Ohio State clearly had the edge in all the skill positions. They had the edge on the D-line and the O-line. And so you kind of always thought like, yeah, you know what? They're going to play us tough, but we're Ohio State and we're going to come back and we're going to win this game. And that's how it looked. And I found myself doing the same thing. Like, okay, look, we know Michigan was going to play inspired. You know, Harbaugh took a pay cut. He had to get rid of coaches to really get ready to try to win this game.
Yeah.
Right. And so now the rivalry is really coming back into focus on their side. Right. It was more of you would hear other coaches in the past. So it's just a game. We don't treat it like any other game. No, it was a focus. It was a priority. And going into the game, I thought this could pose a very interesting challenge for Ohio State only because I knew Michigan could run the ball and they could run the ball very well. And when you start looking at what we struggle with early on in the season, we struggled against teams that could really run the ball. And if they had a good effort and made a really strong concerted effort to try to run the ball, could we stop it when we had to? Yep. So we go a la Woody Hayes and the Bo Schembechler era. It's 3 yards in a cloud of dust. I mean, really, it was 6 yards in a cloud of dust. Haskins averaged 6 yards a carry. I mean, they gave him the rock. And it was something that was not what Harbaugh has shown in the past. Like he's more of I'm a quarterback. We're going to throw the ball. He really got out of his tendencies and he really made an effort to run the ball. Like they ran the ball more than they threw the ball. And that's something that I would have never thought would have happened under a Harbaugh coach team that we've seen so far in the previous 5 years. He's a quarterback like, I want to throw the ball. And I think one of the years that was what got him in trouble is instead of just running the ball and running the clock out, he decides to pass it. We get an interception, return it, and all the momentum was on our side. So I kept watching like, are we going to come back? Are we going to make this? And it was just very concerning to watch that when we needed to get a run stop, we could not. And I know we'll talk more about the stats in a bit, but I mean, if you look at it on paper, this game wasn't a runaway, but yet it really was a runaway game.
Yeah.
Like we were not really in this game. We couldn't do anything to slow them down.
Yeah. Yeah. They ran away with it is best way of putting it, because I mean, what they averaged, I'm looking at the stats right now, 7.2 yards per carry. That's crazy. 299 yards rushing or whatever it was.
But 2 yards for loss, 2 yard sack we had, or 2 yard tackle for loss. That was all we had.
That's you know, and then of course they had 6 or 8 tackles for loss, including 4 sacks. But I wanted to ask you this: as you watched Ohio State's defense, especially trying to stop the run, what jumped out at me was they did a great job of taking away the front four and then getting to the linebackers almost on a consistent basis, but especially when they needed a yard or 4. What just jumped out at you about just schematically the way they went about their business?
I think schematically, I mean, it was pretty interesting to watch how they attacked our defense. Right? I mean, man on man, I always like to look at football and say this is a man with a man game, right? And so when you look at football, we always talk about it starts in the trenches, right? Can you, one, protect your quarterback when you have to throw the ball? And then on the flip side, on the defensive side, can you affect their quarterback? And Michigan did that on both sides of the ball. Like it was a complete domination in the trenches. Really, when you talking about 241 carries for 297 yards. Yeah. 7.2 yard average. And it wasn't anything special. It wasn't like they were just schematically trying to say, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. No, it was big brother whooping up on little brother, pretty much, so to speak, and just really just coming. They fired off the ball. They really covered up the front four. When we had penetration, somebody else came down the line and cleaned it up. Like it was just, they had seams and lanes everywhere to run. Their running backs could pick wherever they wanted to go. There were holes everywhere. And it was just a complete domination on their side. And when you start looking at it, I look at one stat that we also look at, like third down. They only had 8 third downs. Yeah. Like when they got in third down, it was 3rd and 3, 3rd and 2. You know, I think they had a couple of 3rd and 10s. They punted twice. Like, so that showed me that they were really having some really good success on 1st and 2nd down. Like they were running the ball down our throat on 1st and 2nd down and getting it to 3rd and manageable. And now you have the whole playbook open to you. It's not a 3rd and 7, a 3rd and 10 where you know they're going to throw the ball. They could run the ball. And because they were running the ball with such efficiency, you had the run game as an option, and they picked up plenty of 3rd and 3s, 3rd and 5s just by turning around and handing the ball to Haskins. I mean, it was a complete domination and something that I hadn't seen happen to an Ohio State defense in a very, very long time.
Well, at least since the Oregon game, right? I mean, right. You and I talked after the Oregon game, and there were a lot of things Ohio State needed to get fixed because they literally got out-schemed in that game. I think with the running game.
Yes.
This was more of, I was outspoken on radio, TV interviews and stuff like that last week that leading up to the game, I thought the two differences in the game were going to be Ohio State's running game. I keep saying game, but that's what it is. Ohio State's rushing attack. I thought it was going to be the best balance that Michigan had faced this year in terms of being a team physically being able to run the ball on them, but also being able to throw. And I thought Ohio State's revitalized run defense was going to be a difference maker. And they were both exactly the opposite of that. And you can say, well, Ohio State didn't run the ball enough. Well, when you're behind, you're going to throw the ball. But number two, the telling moment in that game was when Ohio State came out in the second half, bound and determined to show they had the muscle and the fight to run the ball down Michigan's throat. 3 straight runs, they punt. Michigan gets the ball and runs it down Ohio State's throat to another touchdown. And, for all intents and purposes, man, the game wasn't over, but it sure felt like it.
It did. I mean, I think that's when I sent you the text, like, wow, the passion and everything on their sideline was lacking on Ohio State's sideline. And I'm sitting here watching it, and you touched on something, right? You touched on the balance that Ohio State needed to have to really try to win this game. And up until that point, after the Oregon game, I thought they really got into a good rhythm. You change your offensive scheme or you change your defensive scheme. But what Ohio State was able to do was they played complementary football. We talk about that a lot. We throw that term out a lot in football. But what Ohio State did was their offense became so efficient. They scored so many points that teams couldn't try to come in and say, we're going to attack their run defense. We're now behind 14 points, 17 points. So you kind of have to abandon the run because you got to get back into it really quickly, or else with the way their offense was being efficient and scoring, you could be down 28 points. And that's what happened against Michigan State. The Penn State game was a little different because Penn State, we were moving the ball, but we couldn't score touchdowns. We were kicking field goals, but we were stopping their run. They didn't really have a lot of success against us. Now you had a game where Ohio State's offense couldn't really bail out the defense. You couldn't get Michigan to alter the scheme and the game plan that they came into the game with. Yeah. And so now somebody had to step up and make a play. And in order to do that, you're going to have to either get away from your identity. So you either got to go back to the blitz scheme that you're running and with the man-to-man that you played early against Oregon and say, okay, did we learn our run fits and our responsibilities because we're going to have to get some pressure and get more bodies than they can block to stop the run? Or are we going to have somebody beat their block? And we couldn't beat the block, and we really didn't do any run blitzes. So they just continued to run the ball and ran it down our throats.
Yeah. Like you just pointed, I wanted to ask you this, though, having been part of games, for a long time at the highest level, what can you change in the middle of a game defensively that can flip the script? I mean, because like you just pointed out, it seemed like that game against Michigan the other day was as much about attitude, as it was about scheme. But was there something you would have changed as you watched it defensively that could have stemmed the tide there? Could you have said, hey, Zach Harrison or Haskell Garrett or Tyleek Williams or whomever, just shoot the gap. You know what I mean? I mean, that's easier said than done. But, right. I mean, just take a chance. I mean, do teams ever get that desperate, I guess, to try to make something happen?
I think some teams do get that desperate. I think really what you're telling your D-line, you need to go whoop a man. Yeah. Go beat the man that's blocking you. Simple as that. Like I'm telling my front four, they can't block you. This is a mindset. This is a mentality that you have to have. It doesn't matter where they are, what they're trying to do. You're better than them, and you have to show that you're better than them. Because right now they're winning the war in the trenches, and they're owning you. And then you have to kind of get out of your tendencies. We like to play a lot of zone. That was our comfort level of coming back and saying, okay, you know what? We don't want to play man-to-man. We don't want to blitz as much because we don't want to put our corners and everyone on an island. So because we're so young on that back end, so you try to protect the back end. You have to get away from that. And so what I probably would have done a little bit more blitzing on first and second down to try to have some negative plays, to try to get some stops just to make it like 3rd and 7, make it 3rd and 8. Because if you get them in 3rd and 8, then more than likely they're going to throw the ball. And so then now you can pin your ears back. You can try to let your front four go after it. When it's 3rd and 3, I can run the ball. I can pass the ball. Like I have to be sound in the run game. I have to play my gap and be gap sound because it's 3rd and 3 and they're probably going to run the ball and hand it off. And because they were in very short 3rd down positions, like it was very easy. The whole playbook was open to them. They could do whatever they wanted. Yeah. And it was just really just that first and second down is really where I would have tried to make a difference and try to get them behind the sticks and try to get them in a 2nd and 10, because on 2nd and 10, if you throw or you get them on a negative play on 1st down, 2nd down, they're going to try to run. They want to try to get 5 yards. You want 3rd and 5 or less to really try to see what we can do. And we never really changed or altered our defense. We never really brought enough pressure to really affect what they were trying to do. And Haskins had a career day.
Marlon, Ohio State lost 2 games in the regular season this year. Both of them wound up being shootouts, meaning the other team got the advantage. I mean, Ohio State came back and took the lead against Michigan, but, not for long.
Right.
But both games ended up being shootouts. And ironically, it was Ohio State offense that couldn't keep up. For whatever reason. It was snowing, but that didn't seem to affect receivers running routes or CJ Stroud throwing the ball. What Ohio State could not get done offensively was block their ends on a consistent basis. And let's face it, Aiden Hutchinson had a game for the ages. With 3 sacks in that game, ends up setting a Michigan single season record, I think, with 13 or 14 sacks.
Yes,
that was no fluke. He was beating his man, caused Ohio State to finally reshuffle the offensive line for a while. DeJuan Jones had a tough game at times. Nicholas Petit-Frere at times had a tough game blocking on the other side, but they flipped the line and stuff. And you're just kind of going, wow, Michigan's plan went according to Hoyle. As the old saying goes, their plan worked. They knew they weren't going to shut out Ohio State. They knew they weren't going to completely shut Ohio State down, but if they could just nick them here and there, they were in the game and had a chance to win it. And it's funny when you see a plan come together, isn't it? And especially against a team like you that you've got blood, sweat, and tears spent with, right?
Right. Yeah. You're exactly right. I think when you look at it, Michigan we're going to run the ball, see if they can stop it. We know we have an advantage with our defensive ends. So if we can get them in 3rd and long, we're going to pin our ears back and come after them. We're going to see if these tackles can hold up. They couldn't. We threw for 394 yards. But I think more importantly, what their approach was we're not going to give it the big play, because that's what did Michigan State in. Like when you look at the previous week in Michigan State, all of a sudden it's 21-0. And you're like, wait a minute, am I looking at this correctly? It's 28-0 at the end of, or 28-7 or something like that at the end of the first quarter. Am I reading it right? Yeah. They got behind so fast. And now you have to try to find a different way to get back into the game, because the run game is going to take too much time. Yeah. Michigan said, you know what? We're going to run the ball. If they can't stop us, they're going to get a heavy dose of it. If they do stop us, then we're going to figure out what this looks like, but we're not going to give up the big play. And so we had to be patient. We had to try to nickel and dime and just be methodical down the field. And you look at times, that's not really what our offense, the offense is built on big plays and getting up on teams really fast, because then our offense can really pin their ears back and get after the other teams. And for whatever reason, their scheme worked. You could say there was pass interference on certain plays. Yes, but they're the home team. So they're going to get those calls. Like if there's a question, if there's hand jockeying, as I like to say, a little hand fighting here and there, they're going to win that battle. They're not going to get the call on that. They're the home team, and they should get that call. We've gotten plenty of calls in this series being at home that you're like, hey, that's questionable. Yeah, if it's a questionable call, it goes in favor of the home team. Yeah. So at the end of the day, we never found a way to kind of attack that 2-deep zone they were running with different route combinations to really say we want some quick strikes to make them come out of it. We weren't really able to establish the run enough to say, you know what, you've got to bring one of those safeties down and get one-on-one matchup. So they were able really to take advantage and keep their game plan of 2-deep safety look. We'll bring our linebackers based off the tendencies. Like you saw them shoot the gaps on some of the runs. It was a definitely different Michigan team. And then again, they played with more effort. They played with more desire. They played with more passion. Like they really wanted to win this game. And not saying that our guys didn't, because I'm not saying that at all. But you could tell one team really wanted this game more than the other.
Yeah, that's hard to say too, isn't it? That's hard to say. Yeah. It's funny because like you said, I thought Penn State and Nebraska and to a certain extent Oregon, but mainly Penn State and Nebraska did a great job of their defensive line blocking for their linebackers, and I saw the same thing in crucial situations by Michigan on Saturday. Their defensive line opening like that Ross kid coming through that gap on that 3rd and short of the of the opening series of the second half coming through. And that just nails you, man. I mean, it takes the steam out of your offense. You can't put it any other way. Wow. They were going to come out and they were going to roll right down the field, and instead 3 plays and out, and really almost knocked out. I want to ask you this. What do players do now? I mean, it's a different era to a certain extent, but what happens after a loss to Michigan to players, to the impetus, especially with so much on the line? Now it's all taken away, the dream of a 5th straight Big Ten championship, et cetera. Probably the dream of playing in college football playoff, although college football, I really don't see the path for Ohio State to get there now. Some people do. I don't see it at all. But what happens now to the team between now and the bowl game? And from your remembrances, your experience?
Going back from my time, I think football is a little different from when we played a long time ago. But I think getting in that situation, one, you regroup, right? You go back, you say, okay, let's go watch this film, as painful as it's going to be. What did we do well? What didn't we do well, right? Because you're still going to have a bowl game you got to play in. So you can't come in and just have this hangover because you lost the game. That would have put you in the Big Ten championship. That would have, if you win that, then you're going on to the college football playoff and have a chance to play for the national championship. Okay, that's gone. Okay, so now you're like, all right, what do we do well, and what do we do? What do we need to fix? Because this is a copycat league, so teams are going to look at and say, okay, whoever you play, whoever you face in one of those New Year's Day bowl games, they're going to have a similar game plan of what Michigan just had, right? And so they're going to say, okay, we're going to do what they did. We're going to attack them with the run. And we're going to play that cover 2 shell to try to limit the big plays of their offense and see if we can slow this game down. So now you're going to look at it and say, okay, as a player, how can I get better? What did I do? And hopefully you look at it and see like the amount of intensity and the effort that they put forth. We need to get that. We need to have that. And then when you start looking at it, hopefully you also, as the freshmen that are there and the sophomores that are there and the juniors that are there, they look at it and say, hey, I know I'm going to have a chance to play this team again next year. We're going to play Michigan again next year. It's going to be at home. And I need to have a major chip on my shoulder. I need to, as Hutchinson came back and said they were on their revenge tour, not saying that you got to be like, I'm a hope, but you hold on to this because nothing really matters. Like you've been on a streak so long that you don't know what it's like to have a loss to Michigan in the last game of the season. And you don't want to have that feeling again. So now you just, okay, I don't want to have this feeling again. I don't like this. And so when you get in that game next year, it's going to be your effort level's got to be 10 times what it was this game. You got to give everything, sell out, because that's what those guys did over there. They sold out. They bought into what their scheme was going to be. And they made plays when they had to make plays the entire game. And we didn't make enough plays.
Yeah. I've got the game kind of replaying right in front of me here as we're talking. And boy, they did a great job of getting out on Steel Chambers more than anybody, almost targeted him, got to get a man in his face, on certain plays, and did a great job. And it reminded me it screwed up, jumbled up the scrape lanes, for the backside linebacker and things. And just, wow, this is the last thing I'm going to ask you. I know that's my calling card, and there'll be maybe 5 other questions, but this, I promise probably this will be the last one. Do you change schematically at all from here? Do you change, you were the one who was fairly adamant. You don't just throw coaches away early in a season like when we talked before, and they did kind of get their act together defensively, right, in my opinion. But boy, in the game you really had to have it, it was all the way back to, the broken big toe, I mean, you couldn't stop the running game. You as an alum and stuff, what happens now with this defensive staff and maybe defensive scheme?
I'm not sure. I don't know if you get rid of the scheme. If you like it, I think once they kind of figured out how to run it and play it, they played it very efficiently. I think every scheme has its weakness. And so I think as you look at it, you have to kind of figure out, all right, how did Michigan attack you? And then that's up to Ryan Day to kind of decide, okay, do I feel like the staff that I have in place can also adapt their scheme and add some things to it? I think what was missing the most was you didn't have the run blitzes that you needed to have in your scheme. Now, was that just because, You made
let me interrupt you though.
Early.
They did run blitz a little bit for sure.
Not enough though, but not enough.
And it wasn't effective for the most part. Go ahead.
Yeah, it wasn't. But do you have the scheme up front with your linebackers and your defense coordinator, linebackers, D-line, safeties to kind of say, we're going to bring it, get into gaps, clog their run and stop it.
Yeah.
And if you feel like you do, then you keep your staff. If you feel like you don't, then you have to make a change because you're expected to win national championships and play for national championships at the Ohio State University. So anything short of that means you failed in your quest. And I know that's a lot of pressure to hold up and live up to, but that's why you go there. That's why you're at that program. That's why you're playing at one of the top schools in the Power 5 conferences, right? So that's what the expectations are. So you don't shy away from that. It's called making the best decisions for your players and the program itself. And so only Ryan Day can answer that question. I would not be shocked to see a change coaching wise and say, we're going to bring somebody else in that's going to be more aggressive. I think you do have the players there. I just think the scheme really got out coached really. And so Michigan's offense and what they wanted to do was better than what we wanted to do schematically. And so you either had to say, I'm going to change the schematic and get more aggressive and bring more pressure, or bring somebody else who can do that, but also have the same ability to be able to go back into that zone, because I thought they played the zone very well, especially in crunch situations, except for yesterday. They did play well throughout the rest of the season. It's just when they needed a stop and had to come with a stop, they could not do it. And that's something that you can't live with if you're head coach.
Yeah. Marlon Kerner, appreciate you joining me again, my man. Because I wanted some insight on guys who played, who've been part, not just of college, not just of college football, but NFL football. Obviously, Mike, McDonald, the new defensive coordinator at Michigan, came from the Baltimore Ravens.
Right.
He changed some things up, and in Ohio State, even though, like I said, C.J. Stroud still had a pretty good passing day statistically. Like you said, they took away the big ball. They took it away. And except for that pass to the edge to Garrett Wilson, that was a hell of a throw and a hell of a catch. That's what it took, though. It was just great plays on both ends of the thrown ball. And, I always said last question, but this is a follow-up, okay? That way it's not a true question. Is there anything you'd change offensively for Ohio State going into next year from a focus standpoint?
I like, you're going to find out what receivers are going to step up, because you're going to lose a couple of guys that put up some pretty great numbers throughout their career. So you're going to have to figure that out. I would have loved to seen some different ways to get to the edge with their running attack. Like, you try to do some big boy power ball. I would like to see some stuff like design, like some misdirection to kind of counter and come back another way to kind of get Travion Henderson on the edge fast and getting there quickly to say, okay, who's going to make a play? But offensively, I thought also I wanted to see them kind of maybe get the ball out of Stroud's hands a little faster, like some quick game, just here's some slants, here's this, and maybe that was their plan, and maybe just Michigan's linebackers dropped in their lanes, and so he had to hold a little bit, but definitely just a different way to attack. Like, we do a lot of spread and things, like we throw the ball out, we get the trips out, throw the ball in the guy in the back and say, okay, make a man miss. But you have to tip your hat to what Michigan did. Like, when we run those plays, we always make somebody miss. They tackled very well yesterday. Like, I think that's one of the things that goes unnoticed in a game like this. They didn't really miss too many tackles. Like, there was one guy on the legs and guys coming. I mean, their pursuit to the ball, you have to say it was there. Like, they played with a lot of passion. They were like, we're not going to let any big plays happen. And first guy wrap up. And that's the one thing we talk about on the NFL level. First guy there, you make contact, you wrap. Then you got to have your gang of pursuit guys coming, and you're just banging and punching and trying to get the ball out. And that's what they did. Like, they took that same effort that we would do on an NFL level that you want to see at a major college level. And they pursued well, they tackled well. And so because of that, it was long, methodical drives. And so we didn't really have any chance to really make too many big plays. And then you had to make perfect throws, like the Stroud pass to Garrett Wilson down there. I mean, perfect throw over the top of a corner who's in perfect position and still almost got the ball out. Like, he really almost got the ball out. If Garrett doesn't do this and switch it to his hand and tap that foot, Like that's an incomplete ball. Like, so again, I mean, I don't know how much I would change on the offense. I mean, because they do score a lot of points. It's just, you have to have maybe a little bit of tight end chips, back chips to kind of help with that. Maybe a little better screen game. I think because when we run screens, we tipped our hands. Like they saw it, they read it well, because we don't run that many of them. So when you have your back trying to get Trayvon to the screen, like they were on it, they had it covered. So CG had to throw the ball away.
Yeah.
So just some different
except for one,
yeah.
which was a hell of a play, and a hell of a throw. But yeah, you're right. I wanted to ask one last thing. I know I said that, but this is it. How long did it take you after a loss to Michigan to get your head back up? And what reason I'm asking this is, number two, do you just keep replaying in your brain plays you could have made, plays the defense could have made, that could have made the difference? I mean, is that human nature, or did you learn at an early age? You know what? Just like when you play cornerback, the last play doesn't matter, yeah, whether you got beat or not, they're coming back after you again, one way or the other. Right. I mean, so
right.
I don't know. How long did it take as a player to get your Dauber back up?
Honestly, you know what? I mean, I think like those losses stick with you for a long time, right? Like, yes, you can say, all right, that play's over and I'm gonna let it go and I'm gonna forget about it because I'm going to have a bowl game to play. And yes, like you could put it aside, but you always come back to that, man, we lost to them, because there's a reminder in the locker room. There's a clock that counts down to the next time when you play them. So you don't forget that. And because of the success, I think this loss, although I hated to see it, it's going to create a renewed sense of purpose in this rivalry for the players, because you had won 9 in a row and you kind of, sometimes you take things for granted. And I think this is going to be something that can serve as a reminder, like, don't take this series and this rivalry for granted, because on any given Saturday, whether you think everyone picked us to win this game, and everyone picked us to win this game by blowout fashion. And then you come in here and you're on the receiving end of a blowout fashion of an old school butt whooping where they ran for almost 300 yards. Like they literally went 3-1 in rushing yards than what you had. And if you add the sacks, it's almost 4-1. So when you start looking at things like that, like we've got to come in and say, I'm not going to forget this. I'm going to remember that. And Ryan Day's not going to forget that. He's going to remember that. And I guarantee you, they're going to have a little bit of when you run your Michigan things in your practice, this is for Michigan week, you're going to kind of remember, hey, remember what they did to us last year. So you're going to have something that sticks with you and goes with you for a long, long time. Like I still can go back and be like, man, if I had made this play, if I had made that play, maybe the outcome would have been different. But I was fortunate enough to be the ones to help Coach Cooper get that first win. So, I always think about that, like, man, like we kind of got that, but same thing. Like when you look at the paper, we had so much talent and could never be focused enough. I mean, 10 penalties, like how many six false start penalties?
Yeah.
Like you can't have that. Like mentally, you can't have those when you're on the road in a hostile environment. You can't give up that many yards and put yourself back. You had a 3rd and 3 to go back to 3rd and 8.
Yeah.
A 2nd and 5, a 2nd and 10 goes to 2nd and 15. That's a lot to overcome. The way they were getting after our quarterback and the way they were playing us, like now you're 3rd and 8. Even if you get 7, you're 3rd and 8. That's a long down to try to convert. So you have to be smart and not get those penalties, and then make sure that you remember this. This is going to sting, and you're not going to forget this. This will be something that you, as a player, you take that all off season. You get in the weight room and you're like, yeah, they beat us 42-7 or 27, right? Like, yeah, they rushed for 297 yards. Okay. Yeah, that's not going to happen on my watch again. Like there's going to be a renewed passion and definitely something is going to happen for this game next year that I can't wait to watch within those players.
Yeah. Hey, Marlon Kerner, appreciate you joining the Tim May podcast again, man. Are you where you live up there near Buffalo? Are y'all digging out yet?
No, we got a little bit of snow. I think about an inch or so, nothing crazy. They're saying some snow later on today, so hopefully nothing too crazy, but we haven't really gotten anything yet. So fingers crossed, because I'm probably in the wrong area for a guy that doesn't like a lot of snow.
I was going to say, you probably got the world's biggest snowblower, don't you? I mean, that's what I would have if I lived there.
Oh, yeah. I got one that clears about 27 inches. So, yeah, I can get a lot of snow out, but still it's just getting out there. I don't want to see 27 inches of snow for a long time. So
there you go.
Hopefully not until February.
Marlon Kerner, thanks for joining the Tim May podcast again, my man. I do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. And, we got to stop meeting like this. Like, It seems like I come on after the Ohio State losses. Let's come on after we have a national championship win.
Yeah, you know what? You're right. I mean, I just thought of that while you were talking a while ago. This guy probably thinks I only call him when there's misery around. But, sometimes, because fans won't answer. You understand that. That old line, well, in that one of the songs, we'll win the game or know the reason why, Yeah, it's part of Ohio State tradition that you dissect the corpse. And, and I think you did a really good job, man. I appreciate it, Marlon.
I appreciate you for having me. Thanks.
Yeah, it's pretty obvious, Austin. I almost called you awesome. It's pretty obvious, Austin, that even the former players are looking for some changes to be made. And these guys played on teams that didn't beat Michigan every year. Even Matt Wilhelm, he was part and parcel to 2001 and 2002 victories. But he was also on there when they didn't beat Michigan. So they understand the sting of the game. But we'll get into save a little bit of this, but I want to ask you this. If you're Ryan Day, do you have to caution yourself about me being totally knee-jerk after a game like this, after a regular season like this?
Yes and no. I mean, I think that it changes everything for Ohio State. As I said, they lost everything. Well, it changes the direction of that, program and the way it's viewed right now. So you have to evaluate that. And if it had just been 11-0 and you lost to a really good team and you came up short in that one time and everything else was really positive, sure. And I know that it's only one more loss, but the fact that this happened at the beginning of the year with Oregon and the end to Michigan will resonate. And I don't think that they can sit on that.
Yeah. It's funny because my next guest, Bill Bender, that's what I asked him, among other things. We tried to keep it short, but just like conversations with you, you know what I mean? Sometimes you get going. Well, we kept it relatively short, but basically I asked him that question. How does it change things for Michigan from not just a Big Ten focus, but from a national scale? Have they reestablished, has Michigan reestablished itself on the national scene? And how does this change, if at all, Ohio State's standing on that national map? Welcome back to the Tim A podcast, Bill Bender. I appreciate you. You know that, right?
I do. How are you doing, Tim?
I'm doing pretty well, man. People think that these kind of games affect the guys who cover the teams as much as it affects the fans and the teams involved. That's not the case. That's just truth in advertising. But, it wasn't necessarily that Michigan won on Saturday, but the way it won. It followed its blueprint just as it had been laid out, just as Ryan Day and his staff knew Michigan was going to come after Ohio State, and Michigan got the job done anyway. And I guess the reason I want you on here this week is explain, number one, how could that happen? But number two, the impact of this win by Michigan, not just on the Big Ten, not just on the national race, but on the whatever you want to call it, the je ne sais quoi of college football.
Well, Ohio State fans aren't going to want to hear it, but it's good for the rivalry that Michigan finally won one. I mean, they had a better game plan, and they stuck with it. They ran the football in the snow. Hassan Haskins was very physical. It was an instant replay of what Oregon did in a lot of ways, where they controlled David. They maybe ran inside a little more. They were creative with their play calling.
Yep.
And they did, here's where I thought Michigan has a chance, Tim, and it was early. It wasn't after they scored on the first drive. It was when Ohio State drove back down, gets in the red and gets a sack. That's a win against Ohio State, holding them to a field goal. And then out of the second half, 3-and-out touchdown. That's when the momentum turned, and it's a big win for the Wolverines, no doubt.
Yeah, I mean, as I've said all along, and this is no secret. It's not something I came up with. You got to make plays in games like this. The game can be 10-9. It can be 42-40. You got to make plays, and Aiden Hutchinson, man, and that defense made plays when it had to, like you said, to force a couple of field goals, which really were the difference in the game when you really look at it, especially the one just before halftime. And, in that opening drive when Chris Olave had a ball in his hands and couldn't hang on to it in the corner of the end zone, they couldn't get a touchdown there. Just whenever you get behind the sticks, man, it's tough. And even Ohio State came back and took the lead at one point. The way Michigan came out in that second half stoned Ohio State on three straight runs where Ohio State was trying to assert itself. and then turn around and scored on 3 straight runs. Wow. That was an uppercut of a tremendous magnitude. Agreed?
Oh, for sure. And they did little things like that they hadn't done in the past. Flea flicker here, aggressive play calling with the lead. Mentioned the missed opportunities for Ohio State in the red zone. I really, like I said, though, I think that game shifted when it was out of halftime, 14-13 game.
Right.
I'm talking with Nick Baumgartner from The Athletic. I was like, this is that drive where Ohio State normally takes control, and then it's 34-17 or 41-20 or whatever. And Michigan stopped them on 3 plays. I mean, and again, it's not the end of the world. I think for Ohio State, the realization that A, can happen, B, Jim Harbaugh and Aiden Hutchinson talked a little smack afterward, and that's part of this rivalry too. It's good for it, I think, and they'll have to look at their defensive coordinator situation as a result.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, when you get beat, when your 2 losses are from a similar situation in a season against 2 of your better opponents, you definitely got to go back and retrack and go, okay, those are the games where you got to show up and win. I mean, you've got to have the personnel, you got to have the scheme to win those games. Those are the ones that really make the difference, not a blowout over Maryland or a blowout over Rutgers. You've got to be able to make the difference in those games. I want to get to this, though. What's the impact nationally of a Michigan finally winning this game again? I mean, does it open some eyes? On one way of looking at it, Michigan just beat Ohio State. The other way of looking at it, Michigan's beaten Ohio State 3 times in the first 20 tries in the 21st century. You follow my drift there?
Oh, and they haven't won at Michigan or Ohio State since 2000. So right. I don't think from a rivalry standpoint, it livens things up, makes next year interesting. As a writer, when you write the same column 6 years in a row, it's nice to write something else. I'll be honest about that. But Ohio State's still a dominant program, the dominant program in the Big Ten where everything flows. Now, Michigan has to finish the job this week, against an Iowa team that's very physical on both sides of the ball. I think if they get to the playoff, it'll be cool. And it'll likely be against Cincinnati. Or, I was kind of joking in the press box who had Cade McNamara versus Stetson Bennett as the quarterback matchup in the college football playoff championship game. And I don't think any of us had that back in August.
Yeah. What does it do for Michigan? I mean, does it put, Michigan's always going to be on the map. Does it put Michigan back on the map from a national situation? Or, you cover the game from a national scope. Was this an aberration, or do you think Michigan truly has stepped back into the big arena?
Well, I still think they need to recruit at a higher level, but the coaching staff changes they made worked.
Yeah.
Whether it was Mike McDonald that had a defense that gave up a lot of yards, but made the red zone stops. Mike Hart, a guy that everybody in Columbus loves to hate, has done a nice job with their running backs. Hassan Haskins is going to play in the NFL. Blake Corum will play in the NFL. So I think it's a huge, significant step in the right direction. I think the rivalry itself is better when the games are close and we see these. And again, like I always bring up, though, does it really change the nature of what's going on? Michigan hasn't won in Ohio State since 2000. And I always say that's when Drew Henson was quarterback.
Yeah.
So until they do that, I think they've got to win one in Columbus to really make that statement. But again, this was a big win for them, obviously.
Yeah. I still remember Drew Henson on that bootleg in Cortland Bullard, because he ran right around Cortland. I think it was Cortland Bullard for a touchdown. I just remember that like it happened 5 minutes ago. Probably got both names wrong. But, it just, that was 2000 in Ohio Stadium, and it's really interesting. Hey, last 2 things. So does Iowa have the wherewithal to beat Michigan? And the reason I'm asking that is, ladies and gentlemen, man, Ohio State destroyed Michigan State, which came back from 16 points down in the fourth quarter to beat Michigan a few weeks earlier. You can't extrapolate necessarily from A to B to C, can you?
No, it'll be Ohio State has learned how to handle the momentum from winning that game because they've won it so many years in a row that going to the Big Ten championship. Remember, they got a good shot from Wisconsin the one year after. They got a good shot from
Northwestern last year, really. Yeah.
Last year, but they didn't play Michigan.
Yeah.
And then, well, I'm going back to the first time they played Northwestern. That one was kind of, you knew Ohio State was going to win.
Yeah.
But Michigan has had two really tight games with Iowa, with Harbaugh and Ferentz. They're those old school coaches. I think they're going to play it close to the vest early, and that it could be a little bit closer than the 10 points. I still think Michigan will win the game as long as they trust McNamara, do the same things they did, get the running game, and they went up front. That was we can rule out all the things that we want. It really came down Saturday to Michigan winning up front with his offensive line, which hasn't been done in a very long time.
Yep. And one up front with his defensive line. They kept their linebackers clean in a lot of key moments in that game, and it was really interesting to watch. Hey, Michigan wins, Georgia wins, Cincinnati wins. I'm talking about this coming Saturday. Notre Dame doesn't play anybody, but I kind of set the table there. What's your final four if the three teams that seem to be favored? I'm trying to remember, is Georgia favored over Alabama? I think it is, right?
Yeah, they're favored by like 6.
Yeah. If the three favorites win, what does the final four college football playoff ranking look like?
We'll get Georgia 1, Michigan 2, Cincinnati 3, and then 4 is going to be a little bit messy. And I'm going to say it this way. Alabama's score will matter because there will be a debate with a 2-loss Alabama team if they lose. Let's say they lose by 17, they're out. But if they lose by 3 and by 2 in a triple overtime game, yeah, it'd be interesting. Notre Dame sitting there. Can Oklahoma State play themselves in? And they might be able to. I think it would be Notre Dame at 4. I really do. And I think Oklahoma State will be close, and they can justify that with a conference championship. But I think Notre Dame would end up 4 if Alabama loses by about 7 to 10 points.
Yeah, last time you were on the show, we were talking about Notre Dame a little bit, and Notre Dame has not really sneaked up on anybody. They just kind of laid in the weeds, after that loss to Cincinnati. Cincinnati turns out to be pretty damn good. We can get into the debate about Power 5 versus the other 5, but group of 5. But it is interesting. This is a pretty good Notre Dame football team, right?
Yeah, and they've won every game by double digits. They took care of their business the last couple of weeks. They've run. Jack Cohn's really settled into the starting quarterback role, and they've run the football better. The line is meshed. And they also play pretty good defense. So I think the Irish are, well, if you got that, then you get Georgia versus Notre Dame in one semi, Cincy and Michigan in the other. It's not bad. Or you could get Georgia and Oklahoma State and Cincy and Michigan. That's probably not what the networks want. They want Alabama to win, let's be honest. They want to get Alabama, Georgia, Michigan, and then Cincinnati in the playoff. And that you get Alabama versus Cincy, Michigan versus Georgia. That's what the networks want. I can't be you can quote me on that. I don't care. That's definitely what they would want.
Yeah, I think it'd probably be where would they slide Alabama? They Alabama to 2 or 3. Georgia. They're not going to slide them past 3 because you don't want Alabama, Georgia again in a semi. You're exactly right. And you want that maybe as a championship game like it was a few years ago. But hey, last thing, I asked you about what this does for Michigan. What does this loss, from your vantage point, from a national perspective, what does this loss in the game, as I keep calling it the Hunger Game, seems like Michigan was more hungry. What does this loss do to Ohio State's reputation, Dauber, whatever you want to call it?
It's the same. They'll still be the Big Ten favorite next year. They'll still have all the right pieces and a schedule that opens with Notre Dame. I had mentioned we talked about the defense. That will need to be addressed, but Ryan Day still kind of controlled that game with their offense because you're always thinking, even in the third quarter, how many times can we stop Ohio State? And it's a limited number. So I think Michigan just got the field goals, the stops they needed. Sometimes it's good to lose. And I know I grew up in Ohio, I get it, but and people don't want to hear that, especially in some places where I live. But it's okay to lose sometimes because you need to reevaluate that. Like you said, when something happens twice, then it's on you to look at that, evaluate, change. And I think they can. So again, big picture, not real worried about Ohio State or the state of the program or any of those things. And, it livens up a game that really needed it. And, it's always Ohio State, Michigan. That was a lot of fun to cover Saturday. And, but it was not fun. A friend of ours, Dave Briggs, I drove with him. Dave I'm going to give him a shout out. He did a fantastic job of driving us from Ann Arbor to Toledo in 6 inches of snow. Great driver, great dude.
Yeah. It's always great to have a friend from Toledo. That's why I always look at it. Bill Bender? I like having a friend from Pickerington or Picktown, whatever you want to call it. I just don't want to call you too late for lunch, man. I appreciate you coming on the Tim May podcast again, my man.
Hey, no problem. Thanks so much.
Yeah, I appreciate Bill Bender coming on the Tim May podcast again. He's an irregular visitor to this podcast, just like it turns out Matt Wilhelm is. And who knows, Marlon Kerner may be irregular from now on. Hope he doesn't take that in the wrong vein. But
semi-regular.
Yeah. You're the regular, man. You're the co-pilot, man. Let's just get right down to it. Number one, how much has this changed Ohio State's status? Can it change overnight?
Well, I mean, here's the other part of what I mentioned earlier, that it's one game. And I got this corrected, and I think rightly, by, Tyvis Powell and Bobby Carpenter, Cardell Jones, and other people. Like, the dominance in the rivalry is not over when you're still looking at a 20-year period. A winning streak is over. I sort of phrased that incorrectly on Lettermen Live on Monday at Roosters. There's what happened on Saturday doesn't have to happen again next year just because Michigan did it once.
Correct.
And as we sit here right now, I would bet that it won't. I think things will probably be very different in the Horseshoe next November, but Michigan gets to play for the Big Ten title this year. They could be in the college football playoff, and then they're going to get to enjoy, and they clearly are already, based on their comments, the fact that they've got a win in the rivalry and don't have to worry about the rest. But Ohio State is not going to suddenly be lacking in talent next year. If there are things that they weren't able to correct on the fly about the scheme that needs to change defensively, well, now they have a full offseason. If they got complacent about – and I'm not sure that, and I'm not suggesting that this is 100% the case. I don't know if it is or isn't. But if they were complacent, or just the fact that they were inexperienced with one starter who had ever played against Michigan because of what happened, with the game being canceled in 2020, whatever it is, it can be either one, could be both. It depends on who you're talking about. Well, that won't be the case next year. Those starters will come back with a chip on their shoulder and understand that maybe that something that I teased Berm about in the past, that I'd never seen this happen. Michigan beating Ohio State. I hadn't seen it in person. And none of these guys that were playing in that game had been aware of what happened in the 90s. Well, now you know.
Yeah.
This game is different, and it can happen even if you have the more talented team. So all that stuff, look, you don't have to make a drastic overhaul to this program. It's fine. Like almost anywhere else in the country, and I know that people will hate this, that it's championship or bust mentality in college football playoff. They won 10 games. They're still going to go to the Rose Bowl. 95% of the teams in the country would gladly change positions with Ohio State. I know that that's not good enough in the Woody Hayes Athletic Center, that they expect more, and they want to win the East, and they want to win gold pants, and they want to go to Indy, and they want to play in the college football playoff. But sometimes it takes a setback to get you there. And I'm not just saying that as a cliche here, but Woody Hayes himself said it. Sometimes you need that cleansing ass kicking to go to the next level. And Ryan Day did this against Clemson in 2019 and was maniacally focused on getting so that wouldn't happen again. Well, maybe this is the kind of thing that will spur them to even greater heights. That's what you have to hope for or expect or want or whatever if you're Ohio State. And I wouldn't look at this roster and say that can't be done. They're going to lose some really talented wide receivers, some great veterans, maybe on the offensive line, but everything is still right there for them to get this thing back to where they want it.
Yeah. Hey, by the way, if Iowa wins over Michigan, does Ohio State still go to the Rose Bowl?
They will not, because Iowa will go to the Rose Bowl.
Correct.
So
I want to make sure people understand, but we're both looking at that game. Iowa-Michigan is kind of a given for Michigan, and yet you remember some of these Harbaugh Ferentz battles. I mean, we'll call it Harbaugh Ferentz battles because it's almost like Woody and Bo a little bit from their approaches, right? And you kind of never know what's going to happen if the score is 9-9 going into the fourth quarter, right?
Hey, and I would very much appreciate not having to go to the Rose Bowl. It is one of the most expensive ones to cover.
Yes.
It is not the greatest place to go visit at this very exact moment as we still recover from the COVID era.
In Omicron, yeah.
So there's not a lot of appeal. Hey, that sunset is pretty. I don't like anything else about being at the Rose Bowl.
Yeah, it's kind of like sitting there all day for the Kentucky Derby, You get 2 hours of sunset and then you whatever. I am with you 100% on that. Hey, real quick though, let's say Iowa beats. Let's get this out of the way. Iowa beats Michigan. Yeah. Does Ohio State get that Fiesta Bowl? Do you think? I mean, do they go to one of the other, group of six bowl games or whatever they call them now? Or would the committee look at, Michigan beat Ohio State? I mean, what do you think is going to happen there?
I think in that scenario that the Fiesta Bowl would leap at the opportunity to have Michigan out there. And I know that that's Ohio State's home away from home, but in this circumstance, I'd say maybe bring in a little variety to the Fiesta Bowl, let Michigan come out, see if their fan base would embrace that opportunity, which I think they would. I mean, it's been a long time coming for them to not be in one of those lower tier bowls, in which case I think Ohio State would wind up in the Peach Bowl, which would also be totally fine with me. I think that's what would happen. I think it's a Rose or Peach scenario, but we'll find out this week, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, that makes total sense to me and everything I've been able to figure out. But let's jump right into it here. Jeff Haffley, when he came in 2019, major hire by Ryan Day. Wow. Changed a lot of things, Yeah. And like you pointed out, you and I have talked about this before. It always helps when you got Chase Young sitting out there on the edge, and Jeffrey Okudah, who came into his own that season after watching, like we watched some Ohio State cornerbacks earn their spurs this year. Jeffrey Okudah had to earn his spurs, and suddenly he was as good a cornerback as there was in the country. And Jordan, who am I thinking of at safety?
Jordan Fuller.
Yeah, Jordan Fuller. I couldn't think of Jordan. I kept thinking Jordan Hall, man. There's been too many guys, at Ohio State with the same first names or last names. You follow my drift. But
Michael Jordan Hall.
Yeah, Jordan Fuller. But what a triumvirate to kind of build, a defense around a guy that's not going to do anything stupid in the back, a guy that can shut down the other team's number one wide receiver probably 8 times out of 10, and then Chase Young, incomparable, coming off the edge. Does Ohio State number one have the raw materials on hand for a new defensive coordinator to take advantage of that? Do you think coming in next year? Because I do believe Ryan Day has to make a change in terms of maybe a new way of looking at things, but also let that guy kind of bring his scheme or the scheme he likes best to the fold, or they would at least agree on a scheme. But what's just your take on the defense? Because it was always, like you said, is always sitting out there. Did it make the improvements we thought it did? Boy, it sure looked like it against Michigan State, in the 4-7 game. But, oh, my goodness, when you get shoved around like a bulldozer, that's hard to live with. It's hard to, as Bryson Shaw said, it was embarrassing. He's one of the few guys that made a play on Saturday that really mattered. But do you think Ryan Day goes that deep and does that?
Yeah. So the first part of your question is,
wait a minute, if you can remember it, go ahead.
Is there enough raw material? 100%. I mean, they weren't patching things together with like 10th or 15th rated recruiting classes. Ohio State has been consistently in the top 5, sometimes top 2. Things are going quite well there. So if you're looking for the next future at defensive end, you're going to have maybe Zach Harrison will realize that he's not ready. I don't know. It seemed like he was trending towards declaring for the NFL draft, but his impact wasn't quite maybe what he expected. But either way, you have Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau coming back. You're going to build with those guys on the edge. Better best 2 defensive ends in the country in the last recruiting class. At linebacker, I think they've really found something in Steel Chambers. That's not news to anybody who's been watching the Tim May podcast. Cody Simon is there, and then you'll have Mitchell Melton back coming off of a knee injury.
Right.
So you have skill there, and I guess Taraja Mitchell's planning to come back. Maybe can provide some of that help in the rushing attack. And Tommy Eichenberg played really, really well as the season went along and got more comfortable there. So linebacker, I think that should be a fine situation. And then Denzel Burke, Ronnie Hickman, assuming that he comes back as expected. Josh Proctor has indicated that he will be back from that broken leg. Bryson Shaw, a name you mentioned, he played a lot better, had that big pick on Saturday. Denzel Burke is a star. No other way to say that at cornerback. Got beat a couple times on Saturday. That happens. That was still just a true freshman year. Another Jordan Hancock jumping in the mix there. But this team has talent is the point. I could keep going, but they're very, very skilled. So coordinator come in 1 year and have an impact. Yeah, Jeff Haffley did it. Would he have sustained that success without all those guys? I don't know. I think he probably would have. You and I both think he's a really bright guy, sharp guy, and he's I think he may regret the challenge that he took on at Boston College, because that's not the easiest job to win at. And some of the fans I saw on Saturday were already turning against him. But that tells you how quickly it can happen when you inherit the kind of talent that Ohio State has.
Yeah. It's like a guy like Cam Martinez, man. You saw him when they put him out there, man to man, say, take this guy out of the game, for example. He did that early on and stuff, but then kind of seemed to get lost in the shuffle. Lathan Ransom, played a lot. Oh my goodness, I still see him getting jerked to the ground on that, was it first or second play by Michigan in the second half. Wow. But that's excuse making, but oh my goodness, but let's don't go there, because that would be another podcast.
Yes, it would be.
But wow, that's all I got to say, right?
Well, I think, let me say it this way, Tim. The officiating was terrible in that game.
Okay.
But it didn't cost Ohio State.
Correct.
Who knows what would have happened if this was probably better for you to say.
Remember now, keep it short. Go ahead.
You're listening to the broadcast feed and I can't hear it, but people are telling me that, they're saying, oh my gosh, a missed opportunity when Michigan drops an interception. The missed opportunity was for Ohio State when Garrett Wilson is getting dragged to the ground by an obvious pass interference. If they have first and goal from, the 8 or whatever it would have been down there and punch in a touchdown, so a field goal, who knows, maybe that's the difference. But those were the obvious ones that I just don't understand. Michigan played better. This is not a post-Clemson Fiesta Bowl where that's the one time I've been like, officiating cost Ohio State a game.
Yes.
I'm not saying that happened in this game. I'm not looking up the voting registration or the history of officials like another fan base may have on Friday night when they were concerned about the crew that was going to be working the game. Michigan won the game. Ohio State hurt itself with a lot of penalties, and the officials were terrible.
Yeah, it's funny because they definitely, the illegal procedure calls were all legit, against Ohio State. But the plays you let go and the plays you don't let go, they do have a bearing on a game as a game builds momentum, as the snowball builds, and oh my goodness, that ticky-tack wasn't even ticky-tack. The guy slipped down too. They called on Nicholas Petit-Frere behind. C.J. Stroud ran the ball, Boy, C.J. Stroud ran the ball against Oregon, and they got a ticky-tack call behind him against Thayer Munford. That's why you don't want C.J. Stroud to run the ball. There's going to be a bogus holding penalty behind him,
Well, it only happens to Ohio State.
Exactly. No, but really, I think fans have a legit gripe in that regard, and those things do add up as a game goes on, especially a game of that magnitude. But Ohio State went ahead and scored a touchdown anyway on that on the one on Saturday against Nicholas.
It did cost them a couple minutes, and
yes. But anyway, back to where we're going. So where do you go? Do you go? Do you bring in? Do you, if you're the head coach, and Ryan Day extremely well, probably as well as anybody in the media, probably better, in my opinion. I know him a little bit, but do you think Ryan Day has been bent on making some kind of substantial change on his defensive staff for a while now? And this just just like the Oregon game caused him to put it in the garage and put another mechanic in charge, does this cause him to go to the dealer and get a new car?
Yeah, I think it will. And at this point, I don't know of definitive moves or candidates to throw out, and I'm not really ever going to do that. I could make a list of people with ties to Ohio State or ties to Ryan Day, and I could put that out, and maybe people would love that. I know they would read it, but I don't want to do that until I know who are serious candidates for Ohio State. And so at this point, I would say I think that the most likely move, I expect that Larry Johnson is pretty close to retirement here, and they may have an opportunity early on just from that regard to start opening up the net and broadening the search to anyone that may fit, that Ryan Day may want to interview. There's going to be a long list of people that want this job or any job that may come available at Ohio State. They can hire whoever they want. And I think that last year, I understand the reasoning that went into promoting Parker Fleming and not trying to get another defensive coordinator because he wanted to wait and see what would happen with Kerry Combs with a normal year. I don't think he regrets that decision. And it didn't turn out to work for him, obviously. But he has shown a willingness when you take after week 2 and you change your play caller and you try and revamp your scheme on the fly, there's not any part of Ryan Day that is scared to make the tough decisions or to make a big swing for a coordinator if that's what he views as is necessary. And I think that he does at this point.
Hey, like we talked about Dudrawa, I mean, there are a lot of reasons why that change could be made there. Most of which, could be his health. Him just wanting to step back. He's won a national championship, at LSU and stuff. He's a coach of great, in my opinion, repute. But if Kevin Wilson is still on this staff, he was a nominee for the Frank Burroughs Award, didn't make the final 5 or whatever it was they came out with this week.
Yep.
It's got to hurt his feelings that Josh Gaddis did. You get one year where things go well, and boom, man, you're the hot tamale. But could Kevin Wilson be the offensive line coach? You know what I'm saying? I've seen that work on staffs. I saw it work at Ohio State with Jim Coletto, back in those early Cooper staff. Yeah, that was a team that needed a lot of defense, but they really played really good offense his 3 years and got progressively better. But my point is, could you see Ryan going that direction?
Yeah, and I think if that's what shakes out at the end of the coaching carousel, because I would honestly, Tim, be surprised if Kevin Wilson doesn't get a head coaching job somewhere with as many that are available. And I've said this to you before, and he wasn't guilty of anything at Indiana. They wouldn't fire him for cause. He didn't lose a lawsuit or commit a crime or some things that other coaches have come back from more easily. If you don't appreciate what Kevin Wilson did at Indiana, ask Tom Allen how easy it is to sustain that after what has happened there this season. Weirdly, Tom Allen didn't have Kevin Wilson running the offense or recruiting players for that program anymore. Now, that's neither here nor there. I just think that
that's more here than there. Go ahead.
Kevin Wilson would like another opportunity to do it. He won't just take any job that's available. He was tied to Akron over the weekend. I don't believe – well, I know that is not the caliber of job that he wants, and they won't be able to pay what he makes at Ohio State, and he loves coaching at Ohio State. So, who knows what's going to happen. But both he and Tony Alford, if Colorado State wakes up and realizes the disaster that they've made for themselves with Steve Adazio, both of those guys could be hired away in this offseason, and that might force a more significant overhaul of the staff than Ryan Day may even want at this point. So that's when I say, how major will it be? The next couple of weeks are just going to be really interesting for Ohio State, and that could be decisions that they can control and some that Ryan Day cannot.
Yeah, and Ryan Day, he had a home run with Jeff Haffley, when his first major hire, in my opinion. That was a home run. You've got to be willing to swing for the fence. Ohio State, with its ample largesse, it's the backing, et cetera, should be able to swing for the fence for anybody from a financial standpoint. We'll see if, in fact, Gene Smith and company loosen the purse strings in that regard. Yeah. But it is amazing the change that Michigan made on its coaching staff from last year to this year, and the difference that made for that football team. That has to be agreed, right?
Yes. And
it can happen.
And Gene Smith has always been opposed to this arms race of college football. But,
right.
The money that's at stake now is so different than when he started as an athletic director. And that genie is not going back in the bottle. There weren't, television deals that brought in $55 million for every school when all this started. So I'm not suggesting that he's opposed to it now. He's going to pay a market rate, and Ohio State is going to remain competitive because they are committed to winning. But, are we going to see willing to go pay $2 million to get whoever you want to be the defensive coordinator? Brian Hartline needs more money. I mean, he had a second NFL contract. He doesn't need more money. But if he's going to keep that role and stay with Ohio State when other programs are going to start backing up Brinks trucks and offering him offensive coordinator deals, those things have to be evaluated. They have to be done. And that's when we talk about a top to bottom sort of comprehensive look in the mirror, Michigan held it up and said, this is what you are right now.
Yeah.
Can't argue with it. It says 42-27. And I know it's one game, but they lost. I've said it once on this show already, so twice. Michigan just took away everything from Ohio State. And if you get it back, it's not going to be easy. And that's going to take commitment from everybody, from Gene Smith to the 85th guy on the roster.
Yeah, I used an analogy on radio on Monday morning in Columbus, and I didn't get to explain my analogy, but I said watching that game was like watching an Amazon package being left on your porch, and you accuse the next door neighbor of coming in and stealing it. But when you looked at the address on it, it said to Ohio State or Michigan, and Michigan went and grabbed it and took it, and it now belongs to them. It is now their property. Boy, if you use an analogy, you need to explain it like that, then I probably should be,
I like it.
Criticized, but that's what it feels like. This got taken off my porch. Wait a minute. What, you got to go outside and get it. You got to put on more than your bathrobe, and wow. Hey, didn't think we'd be talking about this week. Austin, I almost called you your original nickname and then your next nickname, but I covered myself there because I want your mom to have a happy Christmas shopping season, especially when it comes to her granddaughter. But right. It is interesting to be sitting here after 4 straight years, Ohio State going to the Big Ten championship game and winning it, still a ridiculous streak. To be sitting here after 19 games of Ohio State winning 17 of them in the game, to be sitting here after Michigan finally won again and now acts like it invented the game again. Wow, be careful. It is really interesting to be sitting here on a week when all you have to do is keep up with coaching moves and recruiting, right?
Yeah, it's a shock to the system. So if that's the case for you and me, I can only imagine what it's like in the Woody, and that's why I know how seriously they will take that challenge, because for here, it doesn't change anything. We admitted we're wrong, and we're going to cover the coaching searches and all that, and we're going to cover the Rose Bowl or whatever, and move on with our lives. It's much more high stakes for them. And
yes.
I never want to lose sight of that, how much that hurts for them. The shock to us is that, I've complained hey, covering the Big Ten title game is hard. It's a difficult weekend because the game is so long. And then you are in the locker room till 1:30 or 2, and you have to drive back right away in the morning, no sleep, to be into the Woody for selection show on Sunday. It's man, that sucks. It'd be nice to get a break. And then it's well, be careful what you wish for, because it's a hell of a lot more fun and cooler to be covering that stuff and grinding than dealing with this. So that part, hey, it's going to be uncomfortable on Saturday, but the weather's nice. So I'm sure you and I might find something to do.
Hey, one other quickie. Because like I said, Ryan Day as well, if not better than anybody who covers Ohio State. How will he take this? Will this grind at him? Just when you're looking for a chance to get some sleep, do you ever go to sleep after a game like that? Does it take you a week to figure out, number one, you're making moves. Number two, you're making the right moves. Number three, oh my goodness, that was embarrassing. Number four, you get to go shop for Christmas gifts, or are people going to give you a lot of crap, if you get out of your car? I mean, all these kind of things. Of course, he probably shops from home. I don't blame him. But all these things, that just when you're looking for a chance to exhale, this isn't the exhale you were seeking.
No, I guess the word that I got back when asked about how it was going was awful. Tough day, awful, not fun. I mean, I'm trying to be respectful of everybody. When I talk about how much it hurts, I know that. I haven't been in Ryan Day's shoes. I've never felt the pressure of that job. I can't even imagine what it's like, the way that they put the effort and the time into it.
But then to even have an insult hurled your way, in the post game by the opposing coach you don't like in the first place. I think it's pretty obvious there's no love lost in that relationship. But to have that insult hurled your way, when we know how Ryan Day has moved across the country many times in his coaching career to build, to get an opportunity that he has been enjoying now for 3 years as the head coach at Ohio State, to have an insult hurled your way. What do you think?
I think that I honestly think that Jim Harbaugh will regret saying on Saturday, because we've said this before, and I think maybe most people have an appreciation for what we're saying, but you rarely get to see it. This guy, when it comes to slights, when it comes to losses, when it comes to being competitive, there's this perception that Urban Meyer was so much more serious and laser focused on it. I honestly believe that Ryan Day, when it comes to that part of the shoulder chip, the insults that you're talking about, when you lose, the grudge that he holds, I really believe, is different than what Urban Meyer had. I'm not saying one is more necessarily competitive than the other, but I don't think that Urban paid that much attention to what other coaches might say, or if they lost one game that he hated Clemson forever. I mean, the 2019 game, the way that ended, everything Ryan Day did for the next year was designed solely to beat Clemson and to beat Dabo Swinney and to make sure that he never got to say anything ever again. And then when he went over the top and ranked them 11th, I was like, okay, that game is over. Like, there's no chance. Michigan has now done that. He already didn't like Jim Harbaugh.
Yeah.
He already understood the importance of the rivalry, but now he's done something that Ryan Day will never, ever forget for 1 second for the next 363 days.
Yeah.
And as I sit here right now, I don't think that bodes well for Michigan.
Yeah. I agree. I think when you provoke a reaction from somebody, you're not getting, you're not getting trash talk. You're getting reciprocating action. Just like when, as you know, Jim Harbaugh said those things about Urban Meyer, leaving turmoil in his wake or whatever, at every place he's ever been. And I go, I asked him at the Big Ten meetings, do you think that's a good thing to poke the bear? And he goes, I don't get these animal analogies. He had just called his team an anaconda, that anaconda, was DOA, but you know what I mean? It's like, wow, when you provoke somebody to say something bad back to you and now they're the bad guys. Wow. Just look out what you put in motion. I agree with you 100%. Yep. Hey, Austin, we have plenty of time to do our Christmas shopping though this year, man. Think about that.
I will.
No, you don't actually, because you'll be on the phone as soon as we hang up, because, there's stuff that's moving even as we speak. Ryan Day does not sit pat. We already saw that earlier this year. One of the things about growing as a head coach is you have to be willing to just stand back. Everything has to be an objective exercise. You can't have best buddies, one way or the other. You can't have somebody on a staff that you like so much you can't part with them. You know, it's a lonely existence at the top unless you make it, like I said, a little home affair. And then when you do that, that's when you can really get bit. And I don't see Ryan Day being bitten by this. I see him making a move. Agreed? I
do.
Ladies and gentlemen, next week we'll see if any moves have been made. We'll also parse out what the bowl invitation Ohio State ends up getting out of this weekend's action, where it falls, whether it's going to stay in a group of 6 games somewhere, or who knows, who knows what can happen. But until then, for Austin Ward, this is Tim May. We'll see you then.